John, you've had a busy competition season last year, or at least a pretty exciting one, right? So you finally got to compete as an open as you moved up from the 2-on-2. So tell us about that experience.
Yeah, like it's always been in the back of my mind to do an open show at some point. When I first even turned pro, the idea was to go to the open, but I was close in weight, so I did a 212 for my pro debut. I bulked up real big after that, and I ended up getting really sick traveling to the Dominican Republic. I lost like 20 pounds, and I was like, well, I guess I'll just keep doing 212, and that just kept going for years. So it's always been on the back of my mind, and um, I had to take like a chunk of off season in 2022 just because I prepped so long in 21, and coming into the 23 season, I'm like, man, it might actually be really hard to make weight for 212. And I was like, man, if I just do a 212 show, I'll get lean, suck down, and then hit an open show maybe after. So that was kind of always the plan. Didn't have it planned to go as well as it did, just kind of stepping into a new territory, but did the Atlanta show and won that one in 212 and qualified for the Olympia. And then I was like, well, I'll prep for the Olympia. I'll let my weight come up and I'll do Legion. It's like 4 weeks before the Olympia. Have plenty of time to pull back down. And as I was prepping for this, just like, hey, doing the open, increasing food, my weight was going up, and I was just looking better and better. And finally, you just kind of look and surpass this 212 look that I'd never even seen before. And of course, went out on stage, and man, it was a hell of an experience. For one, you're like, don't have a real gauge of where you're at, right? Because I've never been next to the open guys, and they're all pretty tall and like just huge. Like you're like, God, these guys look. Maybe it's body dysmorphia, right? But they all look freaking huge. And then you walk out, and it's like, oh man, I'm kind of in this mix of the first call out, and I get off stage and look at my pics. I'm like, damn, I'm kind of hanging in here. Like, cool. So it was it was all just so fun. Like I had a blast doing it, and it really relit the fire of bodybuilding for me because 212 was just kind of getting a bit boring and feel like I wasn't improving as much anymore. But I got second at this open debut show with like 20 something guys in it. So
Mm.
just it blew me away. And so I'm pumped, man. I'm excited to now keep doing a few more open shows and see where it leads to.
And what was the feeling during the prep where you're just looking at yourself and you're fuller and growing? Like it probably was like nearly like penny drop kind of moment.
Just dude, it's so fun when you're just like you're at your like biggest, like you're eating and you're also super lean and you're like skin blowing full. It's every day is just like this is so cool. Like you'll take videos and send them to my have Renee come, my wife, right? Come look at this. So it was just a very fun prep. Also, you don't get to that point of having to suck down for 212 where life really starts to suck. Like you're
Yeah.
just so depleted. Training goes down the gutter. Like that's not going to be fun anymore. Also, you're very fatigued, so all the daily stuff suffers. Well, with this, training just kept improving all the way to the show. Like normally, I have to pull back volume and right. This wasn't the case at all. Like volume kind of increased and just kind of kept training performance moving along. Also, I just felt good the whole time. So I was able to keep working and being productive. So it was just fun. It's just
You're
it's fun. It's like hard to ever want to go back to 212 because I sat out of the Olympia, right?
Mm.
Because I just couldn't go back to a physique that wasn't that was lesser than what I had just brought on stage. Like it's all bodybuilding. We're all about getting better. So Olympia or not, I wanted to always step on stage with an improved version of that. I don't
yeah.
care if I was like I might realize that I might never go to the Olympia again because of this. Because hey, be real, like the open guys are it's extremely competitive. So I had to be at peace with that. Like seeing out the best version of myself on stage, whatever show it may be, versus maybe being the lesser version and getting at the top level in another division. I rather see out my best physique because I've already done the Olympia, so I at least
Mm.
had checked that box.
What was the weight difference between your lightest for your 2-on-2 prep versus obviously you're probably weighed in your lightest, but what were you then going into the Legion?
I carry a scale around with me to do these peaks and stuff. So at the 212 show, I walked on stage at 214. At Legion, I went on stage at 224. So it was like a 10-pound difference.
So still, I suppose when you think about £10 for the average person, they kind of go like, not really that much. It's kind of, but when you're low 3 to 4% body fat, that £10 is obviously visually a huge, a gigantic difference. I can't imagine how nice you probably felt just standing on stage in the Legion in comparison to that 212 show.
Well, you ask most people that prep for shows, and they're like, how often did you go on stage and have like a good pump? They're like,
Mhm.
I've never had a good pump, right? It's like, well, when you're actually not sucking down to make a weight class, like you can go on stage like that. So you have like energy and stamina to actually pose. Which yeah, it definitely was nice to walk on stage like that. And you're very right, Lawrence. Like there's a huge misconception around stage weight. Um, it goes a long way. I think people don't realize that. Like even 3, 4 pounds up for someone can be pretty substantial, especially once you get to a more advanced level. When you don't need overall like systemic size, you might just need a little bit here and there. Like put like a pound of muscle on each delt. Like your delts would be ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
So it does go a long way. A lot of people ask me, like, what are you gonna get on stage next, John? Like 250? Like, no, you go crazy. For one, I'm already like, seen out a lot of my progress, but like just inching along a little bit goes a long way. And we have to remember too that bodybuilding is not about being the biggest. It's about being the best bodybuilder. That might
Mm.
not mean a lot more size. And that was actually my criticism, not my criticism, but my advice from uh, Tanner Gundy, the judge that was out there. He's like, don't go and try to blow up in size. He's like, we hate seeing waist size increase at all. He's like,
Uh,
just add a little bit more to accentuate the X frame, but don't sacrifice your waist. So that's like should be like a big speak out to everyone about how important it is, like not just to get huge, but also keep in mind your aesthetics and your waistline.
and what kinds of things do you think might contribute to guys kind of where, and I suppose we've all kind of seen it where someone could be on stage at maybe like, I don't know, for the not for the average person, maybe like 190, 180 pounds thereabouts, or 90 odd kilos. But what kinds of things in the off season, the next time they come back, can contribute to that waist size thickening? Obviously, of hypertrophy of the abdominals as well, like that will happen. Um, but is it food? Is it drugs? What would you put it down to?
Yeah, I would say it probably is multifactorial, like a lot of these things. Uh, for one, even when you look at a natural individual, so like rule the drugs out. Like if you become a bigger person, your core is going to increase. I even remember a study I looked at. I think it was in collegiate athletes, might have been football players looking through their seasons and how they've increased muscle mass, but they did some scans of like organs, and organ size increased in these athletes as well. So just like if you're a bigger person, you're going to need bigger organs just to support those systems. And it's not like, and these individuals wasn't pathological, right? It's just um, nature of the course of increasing size. So some guys are very hard on like some of the classic guys that have moved up and like, oh, his waist increased. Like, yeah, man, if you gain 30 pounds of muscle, your waist is going to increase just to support that to some
Yeah,
degree. But it's about also, is it better, right? So did it still make a bigger X frame or not? So at some point there's a diminishing returns where someone starts adding too much muscle, and there's just also that increase of just waist, obliques, all, everything that makes up the core for muscle hypertrophy. But then again, you have the other components that you're bringing up too. So I think some people try to grow too quickly. And when you're pushing that much food at in a large surplus in the off season, man, it's hard to control your waist all off season long.
yeah.
So part of it is keeping good waist control in the off season, being able to actually train it. So eventually, if you're just letting your gut hang out all off season long, and it's just more and more and more, yeah, it does stretch out those structures to where it's going to be really hard to get them to go back. So for one, it's managing a diet that allows you to continue to have that waist control and just not let your body weight go up that vastly fast. Keep a steady rate that allows it to. Um, the PED aspect is a large contributor for the enhanced side, because that really removes a lot of the stop points from a natural. Like a natural is not going to be all of a sudden like, gain 20 pounds of stage weight. But
Yeah.
with the PED user, like using androgens, using growth hormone, it does create a state of potential for increased visceral fat stores, and this is like well documented in the literature. So you actually have a greater propensity to store body fat around the organs, which that increases waist size as well. So if you're heavily abusing androgens and getting more insulin resistant, you could increase waist size just through that. We know just through aging and time, you have a
Mm.
shift towards more visceral fat stores as well. So the aging bodybuilder using anabolics, like you're probably going to see your waist increase also from just fat around the organs. You'll see the guy that's like skinned out, lean, no body fat, and still has a belly, or
Mm.
the beer drinker, right? That has like the beer belly, but it's like no subcutaneous fat. It's
Yeah.
like the same thing. It's like visceral body fat that's occurred. And then of course, like more organ size increase using anabolics, using growth hormone would cause that to happen as well. So I think it's all those factors go into place and lead to these larger waist sizes occurring. Some people want to, make one like martyr, like, oh, it's insulin use or it's this. It's a few things, but as a whole, I think all the factors lead to it.
That was an extremely well-rounded, nuanced answer, John. We can't take any hot take out of that at all. No, I think it's where I like in powerlifters it's kind of funny because in bodybuilders, unless someone has kind of like a quite a like if their core is almost like underdeveloped, it's rare to hear of a bodybuilder almost doing directed core work, or at least doing sets where they're really, really pushing it. I think like anecdotally you'll hear of bodybuilders doing some weighted core work maybe once a week. Um, but even then still it's limited. But in powerlifting you would have core work in pretty regularly, and you are looking for that trunk to be as dense and as thick as possible. But with the definitely in powerlifting populations, you do see that kind of visceral fat, that kind of like pot belly almost come in, and I always wonder, is it a byproduct of bracing and breathing? Is there something in the diaphragm there? Because I suppose when we think about like the bodybuilders of of long ago, like where they were kind of supposedly wearing belts to minimize the waist size, and they were wearing waist trainers and any of these kinds of things. But um, yeah, I don't know. I always think there's kind of like occurrences that are always that with like the Palumboism that I've always found kind of fascinating to understand the reason behind it.
Yeah, you have a good point. So, like, would wearing a belt while you train like make your waist smaller, right? And I'm not on that bandwagon for that group that believes that, because I think it's probably what's happening all day long versus those moments in the gym. Um,
Mm.
I think like even the waist trainer idea, I've never seen someone that had a big waist use a waist trainer and came back the next year with a tiny waist. Usually everyone that's like, yeah, my waist trainer works awesome. They had a little waist to begin with, and now they're like making money off their waist trainer, right? So, and then there's also just problems around it that I see. Like, for one, it could make you more mindful to keep the waist in, but I don't think that's the case. I think people just like relax into them, and so you end up detraining the waist and not
Yeah.
actually training the musculature of the TVA to pull in the obliques and the rectus abdominis. I think that's kind of the big component here. You're not gonna. It's really hard to shrink a waist. Like you have your hip and rib cage structure, and that's kind of what you have to work with it, and just pulling the musculature basically to line up with the hip and rib cage as far as you can really go. I mean, of course, vacuuming you can, but as far as like the width and everything, structurally, you just have limitations around that. So, would wearing a belt while you train change your waist? No. But to your point, like the bracing, right? Pushing out into the abdomen, would that cause a component? I think, well, like even within like powerlifting and bodybuilding, we don't brace, right? From like trying to push your gut out as far as humanly possible. There's a component of like an abdominal contraction and like driving kind of like this force into that contraction. So I don't think it's a maximal expansion of the waist when we're trying to brace for a lift. I don't think that's what we're teaching either. So, could that happen over time? Like cause some type of like, because we know intra-abdominal pressure goes really high during lifts, especially like bracing Valsalva, maybe with the belt as well and pushing into it. Potentially, you might even have greater pressures wearing a belt. Could that lead to some type of tension-mediated, like greater hypertrophy? Yeah, maybe so. But it's, what are you gonna do? Like, not get progressively stronger and build muscle? It's like, so it gets back to the point of like, if you want to get a bigger individual, you're gonna have to do this stuff. But again, I don't say like, oh, deadlifts and squats are gonna make your waist bigger. Like, let's look at the best in the world. C-Bum, Chris Bumstead. The guy's really strong. Like he can squat, deadlift. Like, I mean, for a bodybuilder, sorry, powerlifter guys. But he can still like do like 600 pounds in squats and deads, and he has one of the most aesthetic physiques that we're all aiming to achieve. So, I don't think that holds up. I think it's some of the other variables around it.
I was just gonna say, I definitely agree. It's like more likely a case that, especially powerlifters, that jumping up weight classes too quickly is what contributes to that like more fat gain around the stomach. Because especially with us guys, like if we increase body weight too quickly, like it's not like we're gonna be storing it on our biceps or on our quads or our delts. It's more likely gonna be contributing to the visceral fat. And unfortunately, when somebody decides they're gonna move up a weight class, it's never really like, I'm going to give myself the next 2 years to grow into my weight class. It could be like, I'm going to get into my weight class as quick as possible, because mass moves mass. And, that might just mean a bigger belt sizing, but not as much kind of muscle tissue, right? So,
It's only going to make your squat and your bench go up having a bigger belly, right? Deadlift, maybe that could get problematic at some point, but you're right. Like weight moves weight, so that's probably why it's even more substantial, and just powerlifters in general and strongmen, like they're higher body fats than bodybuilders, right? So in turn, more visceral fat could be present, right?
I always feel bad. Do you know the way like we would talk about people with like body parts where they might be genetically predispositioned for hypertrophy of a body part? I always think like there are people out there that are just predispositioned to have really thick abs, really thick obliques. And I suppose where if you're small little arms and small delts relative to that waist size, you are probably going to have a harder time maybe looking that aesthetic on stage. But I think it was AJ Morris was saying it to Shane, wasn't he? Kind of just there certain kind of there's a certain skeleton that you kind of do have to be predisposed to bodybuilding, whereas like if you've big thick childbearing hips and you have a fairly wide rib cage as well, it's not going to look that pretty from the front. And unfortunately,
shoulders.
obviously, where yeah,
There's some thing out there, an outlet for that person. It's
Yeah.
just not probably bodybuilding would be the best option. Yeah. Like those
yeah,
big wide structures, I mean, that's great. I think probably for strength sport, maybe not narrow
yeah,
clavicles, but
yeah.
at least for bodybuilding, yeah, it's kind of the opposite of what you'd want.
With you kind of going into the open, John, I would be definitely curious as to are there any differences in how you're approaching your off season? Because obviously when you were in the 2-on-2, that was obviously going to be forever in the back of your head, where you're kind of going, the further I get away from this, the further I have to come back down. So could you maybe see yourself letting your body weight drift up a little bit higher? Could you see yourself maybe waiting that little bit longer to pull the trigger on a prep? What are you kind of thinking?
Yeah, I mean, every year I've done this for a long time. I teach people how to do this, and I still every year find ways to do it better, and mistakes
Yeah.
I make. It's just part of it. Like, and so I'm forever learning and student of this. That 2022 season I had where I sat out, I ended up getting to like 262. It was like the all-time heaviest I've ever been. I would say that there was a point that got a bit unproductive, uh, with just probably body fat being a little higher than what I wanted. Also, there's a point where you kind of notice the water retention starts sitting in more, and like joints start to get more achy, and probably health markers are like getting a little bit more diminished, where I probably should have pulled back sooner in that. It also made the start of the prep a little sluggish, and to where, I'll be honest, like sometimes I've had bad, and I'll admittedly say this, like with cardio in the off season, I hate cardio. So that was one thing that it would happen, but just kind of randomly. Um,
Mm.
and so like the start of a prep, we try to introduce cardio and get those adaptations going to be more like fuel flexible, right? It was just slow to get going. And that was one thing I was like, I wanted to change that. So I got heavy, but to come down that much in body weight, um, wasn't that productive.
Mm.
And so I think there's at least in the enhanced world, like I think you could still mass and stay relatively pretty lean. We've seen some new research papers come out too that it doesn't take much of a surplus to grow tissue.
Uh,
That's not how I would base my whole philosophy on, but just
yeah.
another point being that I think we're also letting body weights just drive up too quickly per week in the off season, and then you run into the stop point of where you probably should stop massing, but you're like, but I'm only 3 months into my off season, and I have 4 more months to go. So you just keep letting it go past the point that is productive. So I think going back, I probably would have implemented at least some type of like 3-to-1 structure of like massing to like mini cut or something if I did let it go up that fast. But anyway, back to the question, Lawrence. What I'm doing this time is I am a much slower, steady rate of body weight gain just in general. Realizing too that, hey, if you wanted like 5 pounds of stage weight across this X amount of time period, you don't probably need to gain 45 pounds of body fat to make that happen. So,
Yeah.
and with my feedback as well from the judge of like, don't go gain a bunch of mass and blow your waist out, is another consideration in that too. So throughout this off season, as I've brought up, like I post show, I try to maintain the leanest physique I could without any prep adaptations.
Uh,
So I
yeah.
wanted to end this like 7-8 week phase that after my show being as lean as I could, so I could have the longest runway for the off season and be responsive, but being at an optimal spot of strength as well, because you don't want like poor sleep, you don't want food focus, you don't want a bunch of fatigue for trying to stay too lean or low food intake. So that was like where I was trying to get to. But now that I'm past that, it's like just let body weight move up 0.75 to a pound per week, which is still a decent rate. But again, we're talking enhanced, so it's a little different.
Yeah.
And watch the visuals, let the visuals guide it. And I've stayed exceptionally lean, which is wild. And my body weight says we're approaching now like 20 pounds up. So like 230 moving post show, 8 weeks post show, 230, now sitting around like 247 this morning.
Okay.
Still
Yeah.
have like glute lines. So just letting it happen and not forcing the food up. I think a lot of people make that mistake is like, let me get food as high as I can. That's not what you want to do. You just want to eat within what you need to drive the anabolic process. More food just causes more problems. It'll cause more health derangement, more GI issues, more waist growth, like we talked about potentially early. And it doesn't make your prep any easier because usually those really adaptive people that get high in food, they just have to go low in food back the other way. So that was I've only made one diet adjustment throughout this past 10-week phase, which was like a 40-gram carb increase. And I guess the drugs have done the rest. But not to be joking, but like,
No,
you know,
no,
when you
no lifting weights.
when you go enhancements, there is an improvement in efficiency of food, and
Mhm.
you'll start partitioning more towards muscle, less towards body fat. Like people get leaner, build muscle, so you don't need to all of a sudden like really throw increase food up way high. That's what I've done differently. Is a little bit has gone a long way, and if I'm moving up and the gym performance is moving up, I just let it ride out every week. So um, the plan is to let that keep happening, but I also don't want to sit out for a long off season as well,
Mm.
which I could, but I also have in mind that what my long term goals are within this, and health wise and my age. Like I'm not a 28-year-old bodybuilder. I'll be 38 this year. What's more beneficial for me, like getting on stage this year and showing improvements and having this some time spent in competing in the open, or sitting out for another year, then maybe that's my last year to compete after that. So
Yeah.
um, weighing those things out, I am more apt to get on stage, and I love to compete as well. So if I can showcase improvement and do so this year, getting on stage, and then that's what I'll do. Um, Not to ramble on too much longer, but I found a cardio modality that I love. That's also been what I've kept in place. So I do HIIT only post workout on my upper body days. Do that 4 days a week, and that's been fun and excellent for me to do.
When you say hit now, can you tell all of these listeners at home how to incorporate this? Because you said, I think you said a sentence there at the start of that question, and you said, "I hate cardio," and I think that's where the average trainee can empathize with an IFBB pro, because I think there's few and far between of lifters that'll love getting up on a bike, a cross trainer, or anything if it's involving cardio. We're just, whatever way our brains are wired, the monotony of getting up on the machine just does not satisfy us. So what are you doing, and what way are you kind of structuring that?
Yeah, and I guess some people are definitely different. Some people like cardio, right? I message back and forth with Nick Walker sometimes, and he's like, "I love cardio, bro." I'm like, "Wow, that's shocking," because I don't
Yeah,
feel the
yeah,
same.
yeah.
I don't know. I think it's more just the monotonous,
Yeah.
steady moving. It's just boring, and I feel very unproductive doing it. Maybe that's part of it. So it just didn't cater well, I think, to my psychology. And especially even the way I like to resistance train, like it's pretty high effort. Like I love
Yeah.
intensity, and so doing HIIT, there was I've done it in the past a long time ago. And I did it in prep, and it was when HIIT like was the thing, and it caused like it was supposed to be like more muscle retention and over steady state. So it just fried me in a prep that I did, but I haven't actually done it too much in the off season, but I have the recovery capacity and fuel to be able to handle it easily. But there was a paper that came up not too long ago about low volume HIIT
Mm.
and its effects on like cardiovascular function and cardiometabolic parameters. And it was showing like they're separated low volume, high volume, and sit. So it's not sitting on your ass and doing nothing. It was actually sprint interval training. So they're differentiating HIIT, high intensity interval training, from actual sprint training. So sprint being super maximal above your VO2 max, something you couldn't sustain for longer than 30 seconds, right? Well, this should be like 80 to 90% your actual work interval of your max heart rate or of like your VO2 max. And so it could be sustainable, but it's still very high effort. But in this study that I was reading, doing this 3 days a week for in low volume HIIT, it's classified as being less than 15 minutes. Had all the cardiometabolic adaptations you want from just regular steady state, from high volume, or from like sprint interval training, which for the enhanced bodybuilder, it improves like left ventricular hypertrophy, cardiac function, lowering blood pressure, improving insulin sensitivity, not to mention the training aspects, right? happens when you get really big and you try to do squats for a set of 12? You have to lay on the floor for like 6 minutes after. So
Yeah.
it's also allowing you to continue your off season training productively. So improving your GP, your general physical preparedness, your work capacity, and then also improving your health metrics. Another spot that could stop you from being productive in the off season. If you can't train, your health is shit. You're probably not going to have a very long off season. So anyway, that's what were like these findings of this low volume HIIT. So it just 4 sets, 4 work sets of a minute with 1 minute off is enough to bring all these positive benefits as few as 3 sessions per week. So what I do is 4 sessions per week. I do 5 intervals, so 5 minutes of work. That's it. 5 minutes of work and a minute between off. And at my gym, I do a minute on the spin bike, and then I go to the battle ropes. I'm like a CrossFitter, guys, and then I do the battle ropes for a minute. So I'm not getting a lot of like, it's not all on the bike, so I don't get a ton of like localized fatigue in one muscle.
Mm.
But also like moving between upper and lower. For one, it's pumps in your delts and quads, which is fun, but also it's just complete cardiac fuckery. Like you'll be so, it's like so gassing and takes a lot of effort, but it's fun. So I love it. The psychology of it is like working hard for a minute is exactly what you do in bodybuilding. Like it's so training specific. In bodybuilding, your sets are going to be about a minute long. So I have a cardio modality that's going to benefit directly to my hypertrophy type training, along with these other health benefits. I only do it on my upper body days, which people would probably worry about the, you know, impedance, the effect of, it's going to interfere with the hypertrophy signaling. It's actually a pretty recent meta-analysis that came out showing that like, that's pretty overstated actually. For strength gains, it could be impactful, potentially, depending on how you set it up. But for hypertrophy, it seemed like even to a lesser extent. So with all that being said, like that's how I've been implementing mine. And I'm not over anal. Don't overthink it, guys. Like, you gotta watch your heart rate and get exact in the range. Like, I just do a perceived effort of an 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 for that
Yeah.
minute, and then have like an active, rest period, which is me walking to the next station to do the thing. Or if it's light cycling, you could do this on a rower as well if you wanted to switch. You didn't have like ropes at your gym. You just move hard for a minute, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's some lovely pragmatic advice for people. And I think where you said something there, like a lot of people will worry about the kind of hormonal cascade after doing some endurance type training. They're worried about their mTOR down regulation or fucking PGC1 alpha up regulation or whatever. But it's not like, unless you're like, if John Jewett isn't fucking worried about it, don't worry about it. Like you don't, you're that 20 grams of fucking tissue, you might be maybe compensating there across the week or across the month, probably isn't going to have a whole pile of an impact. But I think where cardio in the off season, and it's one thing I've like I was definitely quite heavy. About 2 years ago, I was like 130 kilos. Don't let this jawline fool you now, John. I was a hefty boy, but I like you. I kind of just made a change and I just stuck with it. And just over the last year and a half, I would be fairly regimented in doing 20 minutes of cardio at least 2 to 3 times a week. And I suppose where, like you, it was just a case at the start of finding something that I enjoy. But I think where you said there, definitely in the, regardless of assisted or unassisted, particularly in men, cardiovascular disease is real. And I suppose where we look at like an awful lot of what we're doing, if you're assisted or unassisted, you do want to try and remain healthy. And I think where we look at aerobic functioning, I think it does kind of get really, really thrown down the chain of priorities. But I think where people kind of they'll kind of hide behind the excuse of, oh, it's going to fuck up my deadlifts now tomorrow, or maybe my legs are going to be fried. But I think where where what I have definitely found is that like if you give yourself the week or 2 weeks to adapt, where the RPEs might be a little bit higher than you expected, like that 220 treble, instead of it being a 7.5 could be an 8.5. You're still going to get it. You're not going to accumulate that much fatigue from 15 or 20 minutes of cardio, or even 10 minutes of cardio in your case, at an RP of 7 or 8. Like it's not going to be that detrimental. So I hope people listen to you and they take that on board from an IFBB pro.
Yeah, I know people could judge it like, oh well, he has the drugs, the system, and that well,
Yeah,
that's more of a case for the enhanced. Like, dude, you're not going to lose muscle. But even if you look at like the case studies and the retrospective, prospective studies on natural bodybuilders, like for one, females barely even lose muscle on prep.
mm,
And then for males, it happens, but more so from like the hormonal drop off. So in the off season for a natural male, like with plenty of fluid present, you have all the recovery resources there. If we're asking you to do like, for say you did it how I did it, like 2 sets on the spin bike for a minute, 2 minutes of work for your lower body, that's not going to impact your leg training at all. It doesn't mine either. Because for one, on the bike, it's all concentric work. There's no eccentric, right? So the muscle damage component is extremely low, a little bit of metabolic
yeah,
stress. But again, like you said, Lawrence, once you adapt, man, the recovery is extremely easy from it. So if
yeah.
anything, it's going to improve your training. You get more gains, I think, doing it like indirectly.
That was one thing I definitely wanted to ask you. So, like your style of training, I suppose you wouldn't be this kind of guy who's gonna look at the lat pull down and go park the bus here for a half an hour. Your kind of training style would be pretty high intensity. Do maybe 1 or 2 to 3 working sets on most exercises, and then you're kind of out the gap. What kind of are you seeing maybe your LME is a little bit better, or are you just generally feeling a bit fitter, or are you able to push those sets that small bit harder?
I'd say this has more application just mainly on my leg day. I only train legs once a week. It's my like stronger body part. But what I mean, I noticed like the recovery between sets is far improved. Like once you get deeper in the off season, body weight's up and you're getting stronger. It's like you need
Mm,
longer and longer rest periods to get back to a state where you can perform again. So that's been improving for sure. I hit all-time strength high like on my pendulum. I'm doing a pendulum squat and a squat right now. All-time strength high on those ever in my life, which I've always run into injuries or something else. So
yeah,
another point being is like from a connective tissue standpoint, it's not impactful because I haven't had an injury. But also like after these sets, like I can keep working. And
yeah,
what I have noticed is I don't get that, that leg day brain fog you get like mid workout where you just like feel like you're starting to be in another world, like in haze, right? That doesn't happen. Like I'm still like cognitively there. Like the fatigue accumulation seems like it's much less having this level of fitness present. As far as the other sessions go, there it's all upper body, so it's not taxing at all. So I haven't seen any limitations in the ability to handle volume or anything like that.
It goes to show the impact of like actually taking care of your health can take care of your bodybuilding, because like that's one thing I try to get across to some of my clients who maybe they've objections to cardio or even doing something like steps. They might not necessarily see the the actual benefit that you'll get right now from going out for a walk or from doing cardio, but the payoff it can have to your overall health, keeping the resting heart rate down, allowing you to handle like stress a little bit better, and being able to improve your recovery between sets, keeping your workout shorter, being able to sustain higher efforts through higher rep sets, for example. Like they all kind of interact with one, right? And like ultimately, if you don't have good health, you're not going to be a good bodybuilder. You're not going to be a good powerlifter. Like it all kind of comes from that place. And you've talked a good bit already about different things you're keeping an eye on with regards to like your health metrics and doing like making sure that you are kind of finding a cardio modality that you can sustain to, because you're trying to operate at the highest level possible, right? So if you're doing it, somebody who's like maybe more in the general population or like a recreational athlete, like this is something they should definitely be considering. to take, because it could be the barrier between them and their like next PR or their next best physique.
You brought up some like other really interesting points in that too, and I would always want to, like, for one, okay, there's certain things that top pros do that maybe you just shouldn't emulate, but there's also like nuggets that you should probably be taking away. Like, if they're all staying pretty lean and doing cardio, like, okay, what's the trick there? Like, what are they doing besides just being a genetic gift from the gods, right, or whatever it may be? But one thing you did bring up was around resting heart rate. So it is one thing that I do track, and when I start a gear, like resting heart rate will just jump up. And I see a lot of guys will too. Like there's an increase in like sympathetic nervous system activity with using higher amounts of androgens. And what also happens with that, if you're in a more like sympathetic state, digestive processes start to not work as efficiently because GI, you need to be more parasympathetic. Also, sleep issues can occur. So I have noticed like when I implemented that HIIT, like my resting heart rate was increasing, and then it started like coming back down to like closer to what my prep levels were, and that was a good improvement too. Also, like I have sleep apnea. I've had it since I was over right at 200 pounds. It's going to happen either way, but sleep quality has improved as well this off season for even being at the body weight that I'm at as too. So I think there's just a lot of benefits that come along with it, and um, staying active and high, having that like we call it like a high energy flux, right? Like being able to have output and eat a little bit more food because of it without going too far where you're will work for food basically, and you're running into too high of food issues.
Yeah, I think I do think for a lot of people kind of miss the point with cardio is that it's there is a weird kind of relationship a lot of people kind of bring, or when cardio is introduced, that it's done as an almost kind of damage control kind of tool in an awful lot of cases, that it's nearly seen as a not almost a punishment. Like there's a guy I'm coaching and he's 21, really really strong squatter, like squats like 220 for reps, and he's like, that's kilos by the way, John, no sorry, but
Oh, yeah.
he I was like, not that impressive in pounds, but 220 for reps, and he's like maybe 95 kilos, but like what is catching him is not strength. For when he's doing these higher rep sets, he is fucked come the end of them. He's so out of breath he can't brace, and like you're trying to say to him like look, on these 4 or 5 rep sets, and I suppose it's maybe not that similar to, or maybe it's a little bit different from bodybuilding in that sense, where the amount of pressure, obviously we see a really acute sharp rise in heart rate during these sets, and obviously like you said there with um kind of the rise in sympathetic nervous system, that'll obviously bring with it increased heart rate, adrenaline, all of these things. So being just a little bit fitter, I think, for powerlifters, like you said, even recovery between sets, like if you're taking 9-10 minutes between a set, like if you're working up to a top double and you can only feel like, but within like the first 5 minutes, I think 95% of your ATP PCR system is pretty much replenished for that heavier work. And yeah, like if you do wait an extra couple of minutes, you see that those further percentages increase, but you shouldn't need it. Like it's probably not required. So, but anyway, long the short of it, I was like, okay, let's try and do similar to you. Let's try and do some intervals, and he just threw the ties out the pram, and I was like, look, this is a sport where you should be healthy. Like you're a fit, lean guy. There is no way you should be this fucked after an RP8 or an RP9 set of 5 that you need a 10 or 12 minute break. Yeah.
It's how long do you want to keep powerlifting for? Like to get good at it, I say this in bodybuilding, like to get good at it, you need to be able to do this for several years, and you'd hate to run into a health issue. Because we even for bodybuilders, we see young guys have health issues that take them
Yeah.
out of bodybuilding, or you get taken out of powerlifting for something you could have prevented. Like, so it's just, don't just think in the short term of like, here's the next squat number I need to hit. Think, what about the numbers you want to hit in the next 5 or 10 years? A lot of these guys, I don't know, per powerlifting, I see a lot of guys are peaking like in bodybuilding, like into their 30s. If you're in your 20s now, like you got another 10 years before hitting that full stride. Like that's a long time of life, potentially living with bad health markers and health, to where, what does that look like when you're 80? If you actually
Yeah.
make it to that, it's not just long about longevity, but also the quality of what that looks like too. So I know in the moment, and many bodybuilders are like, man, I would do anything. I don't care about after bodybuilding or after powerlifting. But when you're there, you will care, because I hear everyone that's retired after bodybuilding, all of a sudden they care, and they're like, man, I was so stupid. So try to like learn from people that are on the other side of the sport,
Mm.
and take that advice and be cautious with your health, because yeah, life after powerlifting, bodybuilding, but also it really will make you a better powerlifter or bodybuilder while you're in it as well, because even the
Yeah.
guys on the tail end are already starting to do the things that likely you're not doing, which are
Yeah.
already the guys that are the best in the sport. So just, how about this, take the advice from the guys that are the best in the sport about what they're doing to still be in it at the age that they're at. So again, the best in the
100%.
world leave little golden nuggets for us to pick up on. Um,
You a little bit earlier, John, you kind of mentioned about like let the drugs kind of do the work, and that's kind of one thing I wanted to talk to you about, maybe just a little bit on maybe like the assisted side. I suppose maybe Shane might have to cover his wad of ears maybe here for this now, but um
Impure.
Shane is now banned from the IPA. But yeah, so like I mean, for off season in I suppose powerlifters or bodybuilders, there is kind of a different kind of onus on drugs, or maybe like, but we'll typically see within preps, obviously for bodybuilders and powerlifters alike, when they're coming up to competition, we'll see an increase in kind of androgen use. But an awful lot of those drugs, we kind of tend to see more negative side effects, or at least the side effects that can be perceived as negatives, but they can also drive a lot of performance. Um, so I was kind of hoping to kind of maybe hear a little bit about your experience, or maybe kind of like what considerations people would use for their off season when they're approaching that.
Yeah, I mean, talking about just an overarch of kind of what that might encompass.
What that might encompass, or maybe kind of what kind of decisions or what considerations they might have to take. So maybe as uh, what kinds of difference, what the difference might be between your prep versus your off season, and what kind of you might favor, or what you've seen work well.
Yeah. I mean, and for a lot of this, it's trying to have some type of structure that, for one, would mitigate some risk, right? Because if you're using androgens and just PEDs in general, like with any drug, there's going to be some type of risk profile that'll come along with it. So knowing what those risks could be would help kind of guide some of the decisions of what we might not want to do for long periods of time. And however, at some point, as you get more advanced, that risk might be more willing to take acceptance there, because it becomes more career based, and the risk to benefit ratio starts skewing a bit. Um, However, I don't coach people to use PDs as safe as possible. I think that's the deviation that I really want to make, is that I coach people to achieve high level goals.
Mm.
Secondary, we'll try to do this with as much risk reduction as possible. Now, I think as your goals become more advanced and you have potential, that's when that skews, where we see the goal probably outweighs the risk a bit. But for the person that's just starting out, the risk should supersede the goal. Like, we should try to mitigate that and put that first before we might see that goal of potential is really there to go all the way in bodybuilding. Because so there should be an incremental process to bringing up PEDs versus throwing the kitchen sink at someone right off the bat. But with that being said, like, what are these risks and what should we do? I'm not trying to give you like the short form of this in a nutshell, but basically, anabolic androgenic steroids are going to be the most detrimental to health, right? And through this, we see people. Main thing is heart issues, left ventricular hypertrophy, changes in heart structure, thromboembolism, strokes. We also see damage to the kidneys. And there is very much probably potential for long-term effects on the brain as well. A lot of this is through steroids increasing the angiotensin-aldosterone system, ROS, the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. Angiotensin is a beneficial thing. It helps regulate blood pressure and electrolyte balance. But in excess, and we see this in steroid users, there's an overexpression of angiotensin 2, which leads to almost all the pathologies that you see in bodybuilding. So in the heart, it increases hypertrophy, increases collagen infiltrates, so more fibrosis of the tissue, actually changing its ability to contract, leads to, like in the arterial walls, there become less ability to relax and constrict, so it becomes more vasoconstriction occurring, damage in the kidneys, damaging the blood-brain barrier and vascularization to the brain, leading to also just angiotensin is binding on the receptor sites for the heart, kidneys, and brain, increases inflammation, oxidative stress. So if you had to give like one thing that should be risk mitigator, is controlling angiotensin 2. Like, this stuff is what's going to contribute to almost all the pathologies in bodybuilding. So for one, monitor your blood pressure. Like, just if you do anything from this, like, and you're going to use anabolic steroids like growth hormone, check your blood pressure once a week and watch it. Now, just because you have normal blood pressure does not mean that you're not escaping the effects of angiotensin. So I'm still a pretty strong proponent of, if you're going to use super physiological amounts of steroids, to have at least the lowest efficacious dose of an ACE inhibitor or an ARB present would be huge for the long-term mitigation of a lot of this. Not saying it's going to prevent it, but at least we might be lowering that risk, because we're seeing this as like such an issue. And even when guys lower their androgens, angiotensin-aldosterone continues to be elevated for long periods after. So this can be really problematic for bodybuilders. And then I would escalate up that blood pressure medication if you are seeing rises in blood pressure from there. So that's how I would kind of go about it. So that's one like strategy I would at least utilize if you're going to be enhanced, moving to super physiological amounts. There are some natural things too that would help with mitigation, but again, I don't want to get off on a health tangent if you ask me about like how to structure this to get huge. But
this is great. You keep doing your thing.
But to get huge, you also need to be healthy. The longer you can stay healthy for, the bigger you're going to be able to get and hold those higher body weights. So just being a big guy, an extra 50 pounds is going to potentially raise blood pressure in a lot of people. So that's why some type of blood pressure med could probably need to already be in place. And I would, either way, lowest effective dose. Some people bring up the case of I get so much fight on some guys taking a blood pressure med, but they're willing to stack like 5 different steroids together, or a research chemical not tested that you get off a site. I want, RTD2521. It's like, what is this? I don't know. It's supposed to make you huge, but no, I won't take a blood pressure medication. Like, it's crazy. It's crazy to think about that. So, so that's one thing I would say for risk mitigation. I I am still like using metformin or in a lot of instances, just because it does the other aspect around like risk of just high body weights, high food. If you're using growth hormone, would be insulin resistance and all the detrimental effects that would happen around that. That could be a low dose could help with just deterring some of that a bit. So those are like two things that I would want to keep in place. The last one, I would go more off of a needs basis if we're seeing like lipid skewing occur, because absolutely using steroids could skew your lipid profile. It could increase like ApoB and make it more an atherogenic inflammatory environment for atherosclerosis would be using a statin or a PCSK9 inhibitor, which are some of the newer ones. That would be another substantial one to do. And you talk about direct evidence of like lowering LDL and the reduction in morbidity and mortality it's undeniable. So watch your lipid profile. So with that being said, how to monitor this stuff is, hey, we're going to check blood pressure once a week, and every 12 weeks we pull a comprehensive blood panel, CMP, CBC, lipids. I want to see like a vitamin D on there. I want to see a fasting serum insulin level and ferritin level, and also a I don't know if I mentioned it, CRP, high sensitive C-reactive protein. Those would be some ones that we want to continually check. And then once a year, let's get an echocardiogram. I want a direct look at the heart, because what is the number one risk? It's to the heart. So let's look at directly at the heart size and function to be able to track that risk and trend it over time. So those are a few things that I would already have in place for strategies to just monitor the risk and then make interventions present for when those risks do occur. Now, from an actual like compound usage standpoint, testosterone should be the base of every cycle. And this is the case whether you're a powerlifter or a bodybuilder. We see testosterone has, for one, if you're low in testosterone, it leads to pathology, right? We have guys of higher risk for cardiovascular issues, cognitive issues. Bringing it back up to physiological norm has risk reduction, but going super physiological with androgens also brings about pathology. Now, testosterone is cardioprotective, neuroprotective, and renal protective. However, if you block estrogen, you take an aromatase inhibitor, we find out that testosterone, it's not actually the testosterone that's protective. It's the estrogen.
Yeah.
Right? So estrogen mitigates the effects of angiotensin on the heart, does all the opposite. It helps decrease collagen infiltrate, helps reduce left ventricular hypertrophy. It is protective for the brain, protective for the kidneys. So, and it's anabolic in its own right, like, and part of the heart functions, right? So it increases nitric oxide, increases blood flow delivery. It increases GH to IGF-1 conversion. It can help with increasing glucose 6-phosphatase, which has a role in glucose uptake and insulin sensitivity on peripheral tissue. So in its own right, estrogen is going to make your cycle more effective and protect all health systems. So testosterone should be a base with using as much as you can tolerate to a point where you might see negative effects of estradiol occurring. And people ask, well, what are these negative effects? The main ones I run into are some guy gets gyno, or there's too much water retention, and it's blurring your visuals. So that would be the time to pull back. If you try to go off lab work, and I've seen this, guys, like my estradiol's high in my labs. If you're not pulling an ultra-sensitive estradiol lab, it almost doesn't even matter what the estradiol says because it's so inaccurate. For one, like gas chromatography can have like a 20% error in just estradiol measurement. So you're already could be skewed, but there's cross reactivity with all these other steroids that we take to estrogen or testosterone. So say you're taking trenbolone, well, that pops up as estradiol on a non-specific test. So I have guys in prep that are on the show, they're barely taking testosterone with high estrogen. They're like, oh man, I need to take like this letrozole, this AI. It's like, no, it's just your lab test isn't specific enough. So I would more so go off of your basis. The point of me saying all this is that I would more so go off the subjective of how high you can tolerate testosterone, estrogen, versus off of a lab. Treat the person, not the lab marker in this instance. From there, that cycle design, once you have your point of testosterone, that's when I would bring in a secondary compound, because we don't want something that converts to estrogen or that's driving up this water retention. We'd want something that's just a pure, like an anabolic without all the androgenic component, which would be the most benign drug from there, which off the clinical literature looks like some of the DHT derivatives like primobolan or masteron doesn't convert to estrogen, and it doesn't convert to DHT. So you have these are made for females. That's what they use clinically. So you could fill in the rest of that milligram total you need to grow with this DHT derivative. And that's how I basically structure my off-season and prep as a framework. So like right now, all I take anabolic wise is testosterone and masteron in my growth phase and growth hormone. So growth hormone, I want to also use like some other compounds that might be the lesser risk, which if anabolics, steroids are the highest risk, growth hormone is much lower, but it enhances the effects of your androgens that you use. So I used to be the idea that you would wait till you're really advanced to use growth hormone. That's like playing the ace card. I think of it completely different. I would have implemented it early on in my journey, so I would have to use less steroid then, the most deleterious aspect to health. So that's another point that's kind of changed. But yeah, so two anabolics and growth hormone is how I've like structured this off season, with also some of the health aspects that have been introduced. Then from there we have all the kind of the phase dependent drugs, the stuff you mentioned, Lawrence. Like you can't stay on halotestin all year long for powerlifting or whatever, a strong strength drug that you choose. So from there I see like the trimbolones, the nandrolones, any orals for the most part are ones that I use, just basically save all orals for prep. I don't use them at all in off season on my guys, whether we're using fat loss phases or whatever. Everything we need from a bodybuilding perspective is about muscle retention and building, which we can get all that from just an injectable rather than have something that's, liver toxic and, skew our lipids even more and leads to a short-term outcome. Like we can't sustain oral steroid usage. So for long durations in the off season, it just doesn't fit what your need is. So I save those for prep when we need something that's fast acting to uphold tissue. When it doesn't make sense to raise injectables that take this time to build up in the system, I need it like now. That's when on the tail end of prep we might use an oral. And I'll tell you, like for that open show I did, first time I didn't even use an oral steroid going into that show. When food's up, you don't need as much drug. So I already got lean. Training performance was increasing. So why would I need more steroid if I'm improving training performance? Like that should be our ultimate like sign that you have plenty of drug present is training performance. And I think that's people lack a rationale now of, well, when do you increase PEDS or when do you decrease them? What's the guide there? And it's not just here's your black and white protocol that other coach gave me. It should be based on some type of assessment. We base everything else on something, whether it be when to increase your volume or when to increase your food. When do you increase your drugs? And well, the best proxy for hypertrophy is going to be acute training performance increase after you have, of course, weighed out any variables that are you recovering? Are you needing a deload? Or is that masking your actual training performance increase? So, that is the long story. Somewhat, it actually gets longer, but try to answer your question
No,
in a nutshell a little bit.
that was so good. And I think you gave some really specific guidelines. I think an awful lot of people I love hearing you talk about training. I love hearing you talk about your own experience because you very clearly delineate it, and I think what you're really really methodical in your approach to things, and I think that's where an awful lot of people probably do connect with you. Like I remember following you for, I think, was the USA's prep.
Oh,
This
probably
was
so.
this
Yeah,
was
we
this, yeah,
documented all that. Yeah.
uh, long time ago, and I really liked your kind of approach to how you spoke about your training, how you spoke to your food, your drugs, anything like that. And I think where obviously your kind of background in exercise science and your interest in it obviously does stand to that decision making process. But I think regardless of if you're a bodybuilder or a powerlifter, anybody could listen to that couple of 15 or 20 minutes and pick real nuggets of wisdom out of it. What I'm always kind of I suppose curious about, or maybe particularly in powerlifting, but with you as regards a lot of these health markers, what kind of or maybe not health markers, but what kind of feedback is going to determine your cycle length, or maybe when to pull the plug on a period where you're going to have higher dosages?
Yeah. Of course, like what I usually find is that the bottleneck in off season or growth periods, usually it's not necessarily the health marker derangement. I usually run into other issues occurring before then, and I seem to always find these occur around this 16 to 20 week of continued pushing.
Uh,
Usually there could be one is hunger is shot and the guy just cannot eat anymore. So if you
yeah,
can't eat, you can't grow. That's our stop point. And in turn, if you have to back off food, we're going to back off drug and move to like a maintenance phase. So that could be one. The other one is guys get too fat too quickly. And all of a
yeah,
sudden,
yeah,
if it takes you more than 24 weeks to diet for a show, that for bodybuilding is not acceptable because we can't just think about the moment of where I'm in for a growth phase. We have to realize that there's a point after off season where you need to be a competitive bodybuilder. So if you're getting to a point, and honestly, I've lowered this down. I think if you need to be able to prep within 20 weeks, and if you get to that point of 20 weeks, then you should probably mini cut back down and then grow back up, and let that be kind of your range. So look back to when what you looked like for your last prep of whatever it was, 20 weeks out. That should probably be your stop point if you actually got in shape. If you didn't
yeah,
get in
yeah,
shape
yeah, yeah.
and you're like, oh, I needed another 4 weeks to diet. Okay, well, look at your 16-week out pick. That's your stop point for body fat. Now, I put the caveat that for some individuals, we might need to set a little bit higher threshold because they have a higher body fat kind of settling point where they're productively really strong. And Luke Miller, he won't mind me talking about him. He's, my partner here in J3U is he's kind of that case where his set point is higher. So we have to keep him in a higher body fat range to be productive in the gym, which for him, it requires kind of a pre-prep phase that is fat loss before going into actual prep fat loss phase. There's those individuals, but for the most part, I would say letting that be your limit of that you can diet with for a show within 20 weeks. And what that visually probably looks like is going to be 15-ish% body fat, like definitely no higher. And what that like might look like to the eyes is probably like, hey, you should always have like some degree of visible abs present.
Mm.
The whole thing. I'm not talking like an ab outline of the obliques. I mean, like I want to see like everything. And then I also want to see separation in the quad from hip to knee, some degree of that. That's probably about that. Um, and so that's one guy. A fat would be a stop point as well. The next from there could be soft tissue productivity to be able to train, right? If you just have these accumulation phases of progressive loading, that might
Yeah,
guys not be able to progress anymore because they're getting beat up. That would initiate moving to like a maintenance phase. And then the final one that I would say would be health markers. And
yeah,
that's the real gray area because there's a degree that we could accept in the degree
mm,
that we don't want to go into. Um,
yeah,
I would say if these health markers are definitely leading to areas where you can't train, sleep, or eat the things you need to grow, that would for sure be the cutoff. And then also, like, just have to really weigh it out. How far beyond normal limits for health are we going? Is that something that we can bring back down to a
Yeah.
normal area with maybe some of the mitigation strategies I brought in? If not, we kind of have to weigh out each one individually and say, all right, we should pull back and address this. And then when we move into this next growth phase, maybe we collected off that data and we do something different, right? So, I found guys that all of a sudden their LDL is like, 160 milligram per deciliter, like, double normal limits, right? It's like, oh shit, well, we
Yeah.
didn't see that coming. They actually found
Yeah.
out they're very responsive to saturated fats in the diet, the combination of PEDs. So we need to like restructure the diet a bit. Probably need to have that statin in place, and then we can implement that, address it, then move into our push phase, rather than trying to like implement these things and just extend this phase that's already turning into something less productive. But wrapping that back up, Lawrence, used to be ideas like, hey, if health markers are good, you just keep on growing. And I find that's just not the case. It tends to be
Yeah.
a stop point, and I usually set it now at just 20 weeks because through experience, I've realized that most guys aren't productive after that. So 16 to 20 weeks is kind of what I allocate with that little bit of
Yeah.
wiggle room in there.
Yeah, I think where you kind of said something as well there about pushing, and I think it's something that's really, really common in powerlifters, and I just don't think powerlifters assisted particularly acknowledge it where, uh, like I suppose where we have, like you said, kind of about soft tissue, but it's not uncommon, or it's far more common in the assisted or untested world to see tendinopathies, tears, avulsions, any of this crazy shit happen, and it's usually from guys that are, you're talking, I would say a 16-week cycle could be on the conservative side of what could be ran, and I always think it's from listening to the likes of you, or I've kind of other friends in the untested side that are really, really, I suppose, we like to talk about the periodization of our training, but I think, like you said there, where there has to be some forward thinking to the plan. Okay, I'm 12 or 16 or 20 weeks out from this competition, and I think people will start off at the highest superphysiological dose that they can tolerate, and they'll hold at that for 12, 16 weeks, and then they're a walking tendinopathy come 4 weeks out of the competition, and then they just decide to fuck a load of Anadrol in on top of it just to make sure they don't eat or sleep. And I think that's where that's where I kind of think I really like the way you talk about it, and I think where you will put up your hand and you'll say this is not in the pursuit of health. If you're going into the assisted or untested world, you are essentially saying that there's a performance goal here that I'm aiming to achieve, and that this living within this realm or within this sphere is also time bound, that it's not it's not something you would be aiming to tolerate a cycle for 24 or 30 weeks or anything crazy like that. So I hope there's a couple of powerlifters out there that can take what you're saying on board and maybe apply it.
I think you bring up another point too of like your week one of using, like, you're going on cycle. I hate using these terms, but they're understandable. Like, I think like your PED should be scaled just to the phase you're in, and not
Mhm.
necessarily thinking of it as blasting and cruising anymore, or on or off, because it gives the idea of an X amount goes here and a Y amount goes there, which it should
Uh,
be like titrations up and down just based on the need of that phase. But week one, when you're a powerlifter or a bodybuilder and you want to grow or get stronger, we don't all of a sudden double our food intake, right? We don't go from 3,000 to 6,000 calories a day because, well, why not? Well, you get really fat, like really fast, right? You accumulate a lot of stress on GI too. Or would you go from squatting 3 sets to, well, I'm going to go to 6 sets this 1 week? It's like, no, hell no. Like you would just get smashed by week 1. Like where do you go from there? You accumulate up in food and training. Shouldn't drugs scale along with that too? Like week 1, would you need 3 grams of gear to grow on week 1? No, no. Like you just need a little bit more. Then you grow, then you need a little bit more. So there should be like at least, and how much does this make a difference? I can't say. I don't have, there's no studies of this, right? But it at least theoretically makes sense that if you threw a gold gasoline container on a fire, it'd probably explode. Same thing with your organs, right? You throw 3 grams in week 1, like all the organ stress will be tremendous. Yeah, you're gonna feel like a monster off the first couple weeks. To your point, Lawrence, you might be the most susceptible to like tearing something off the bone because of the rapid strength increase, but there's no
Yeah.
long-term vision of how do you sustain that. So
Uh,
we just we at least have like, and all my guys will be like some type of short-term escalation up to a peak dose. That could be 4 weeks or 8 weeks. It depends how much runway I kind of see they have for the off season. Then we get up to that peak dose and hold it for 8-12 weeks from there. But that slow titration, I think it would be less impactful for the organ systems. Also, probably a little safer for connective tissue issue. And you could have a prolonged off season because if you accumulate a lot of just stress in those first few weeks of going on cycle, you might limit how long you can do that for on the back end of that cycle as well. So this is why we might be able to have that, even that 16 to 20 week phase. And at the end, you're like, hey, I'm still good health wise. It's more of the other issues I need to clean up versus, oh man, my lab markers are trashed. My blood pressure is trashed. And that's the stop point for me. So I think, what you bring up is that there should be some type of just a slow escalation off the front end, and I see it only leading to more progress long term when you look past just what's right in front of you.
yeah, I always think about when we think about muscular adaptations, neurological adaptations versus uh, tendon and ligament adaptations, they are not a homogeneous set of tissues. And I always kind of wonder, like I remember hearing of my first bicep tear, and I was like, what? I was like, how? I played rugby and hurling when I was a nipper, like, and you don't really hear of tears much. Maybe like a hamstring tear of someone when they're sprinting, but like not a fucking avulsion or anything crazy. But it's only, and then like you get involved in like within the IPF, obviously, I suppose, like you would rarely hear of a tear, but you go to an untested meet and you get 4 bicep tears, 4 quad tears, and probably someone will tear a lat as well or a pec
Heck,
benching, but it's a pec, yeah, pec tear, yeah. And like, I mean, it is probably something for people to consider, and I think where I'm always thinking with powerlifters, particularly in the untested side, is that sharp rise in performance uh, is obviously an awful lot down to not awful lot down to, but if you're seeing a sharp rise in performance of somewhere between 10 to 20%, and you're going from squatting 200 for a double to 240 for a double, those tendons are not adapted to that load within the space of whatever 6-8 weeks, and that's where I kind of see people running into issues. So there is probably a potential to what you said there, where they might have a slower rate again, but I think if they committed to that, you probably would see people hanging around in the sport an awful lot longer. Like, I mean, like you did your first bodybuilding competition when you were, did you say 24, 23?
26. Yeah.
Or 26? So
I'm
like, I mean,
47
you've
now,
been,
so it's been 11 years
yeah,
later, right? So
11 years late, yeah, 11 years, and you're at the upper echelons of the sport, and may you stay there, but you could be easily competing into your 40s, and I think that's where the longevity component of it really, really comes in. Like if you talk to like I would coach a good few junior powerlifters, so these are all like like guys and girls that are in their like late teens, early 20s, and like you said, if you want to get in any way good or up to the upper echelons of bodybuilding, powerlifting, anything, you probably do have to commit maybe a decade to before you're right up at that higher level. Unless you've just fucking won the genetic lottery and you're, I
Yeah.
don't know, a Dan Green or a Ronnie Coleman or a Jesus Oliveras or one of these people that have a meteoric rise and they stay there. But I think the longevity element of it in the untested world probably needs to inform people's decisions a little bit better, maybe.
I think just enjoyability too. Um, whether you're achieving, want to achieve a high level or not, like most of us get into it just because we love to lift. And the
Mhm.
worst thing ever is to go to the gym and trying to have to work around niggles and injuries and just you
Yeah,
can't train the way you want anymore. Like that's some of the most discouraging part around it. So
yeah,
I think it's a big enjoyability piece for the longevity as well.
yeah, 100%. Yeah. Um, John, that was kind of everything I was kind of hoping to talk to you about. I'm definitely conscious of your time. Shane, was there anything you wanted to ask
No, we pretty much covered
or
like
kind of go through?
everything I'd listed out there to talk with John about. But yeah, John, that was amazing, and there's a lot of people who will find this very 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 helpful. Talked a lot about like health risks, health monitoring, kind of smart strategies in regards to if you were to go about taking PEDs. So yeah, thank you very much for the masterclass.
Well,
Yeah,
guys,
that's
thanks for having me
that.
on. I really do appreciate it and being able to share the stage, and hopefully some people have had some good takeaways. So.
Yeah, no, thanks so much, Sean. Shane, do you want to plug or
Wrap it
get
up.
John
Yeah,
to maybe plug his?
John, do you want to tell everybody where they can find you? All the good things you have to share.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I'm mainly active on Instagram, so at John Jewett 3. We did start some separate pages for. We have a like at J3 University page where we're just putting like, because now it's more than just me. There's Luke and Daniel doing education work, so that where we put a lot of education stuff. We just started a coaching business as well too this year. Some of the people that have come through J3U, which are phenomenal coaches. I wish I could coach everyone, but the next best thing is the coaches that I've been mentoring to get service through them and try to expand and elevate the industry, right? So we now have 9 coaches that we've hired that are J3U coaches that we just opened that business. So that's at J3 Coaching, or J3U Coaching is the Instagram there. A few other things coming through the pipeline is that if you're familiar with J3 University, that is the 101 of how to just get better in physique competition, whether you're a male or female. Takes you through all the information that you would need to do so from prep to off season, everything in between. What we wanted was there needs to be a next step up. So in February, we're launching the level 2, which Luke and I took it's all case studies. So you learned all the 101 information theoreticals, which a little bit of application in level 1. Level 2 will be all practical experience based and application and working through every phase, off season, pre-prep, contest prep, peak week of our athletes, which will be a 15-week period, which at the end you can become J3U physique coach credentialized. So you can put the J3U PC after your name. We'll list you on our website as a credentialized coach to access, and then also have some uh, access to like exclusive stuff we're going to start doing, like a J3U only seminar. But this will be, yeah, a 15-week just case study based study. And throughout, it's really cool because we have it to where I'll prompt like, here's our athlete check in, this is what's happened, and then a question will pop up on the screen for you to have to make the decision process along with me of where we're guiding this athlete in the process. So it's the next best thing. If I could have like 50 people along with me at a show, and we're peaking this athlete and doing the case study together, it's the next best thing that I could do is do it online. So with prompting people, with making the right decision process, I think that's the next step in coaching is you have the information, but you need the experience and the decisions that take from years of experience. And so that's what we're sharing in that. So it's truly unique. There's nothing else around that does something like this. But anyway, it'll only be available to 50 people and only opened every quarter. So that will be coming very soon.
That's amazing, John. Come here. We can't thank you enough for coming on. It's your second time on, and you never fail to bring kind of interesting topics to light. So thanks so much. If you did enjoy the podcast, please like, share, and what's the other one? Subscribe, Shane. Did I get that right? Did I get that right, Shane?
That kind of thing. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, rate a review. But yeah, thanks so much, John, and we'll see you all again in the next episode.